The winter wind whistled through the empty streets of downtown Seattle, carrying with it the first hints of dawn. While most of the city still slept soundly in their warm beds, a young girl of 19 huddled in the doorway of Reader's Corner, an old bookstore that wouldn't open for several more hours. Her name was Amy, and this spot had become her unofficial home for the past 3 months. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders, trying to trap whatever warmth she could find. The concrete beneath her was cold and hard, but at least the store's deep doorway offered some protection from the biting wind. Her backpack, worn at the edges but still sturdy, lay beside her like a faithful companion. It contained everything she owned in the world: 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, some basic toiletries, and her most prized possession: a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that had been with her through 3 foster homes. As the sky began to lighten, Amy reached into her backpack and pulled out the book. The familiar pages brought comfort, even though she had memorized most of it by now. Reading helped her forget about her rumbling stomach and the uncertainty of where her next meal would come from. Just 3 months ago, she had a job at a local diner and shared a tiny apartment with 2 other girls. Then the pandemic hit, the diner closed, and without any savings or family to fall back on, she found herself joining the growing number of young people on the streets. But Amy wasn't one to give up easily. Every morning, she would walk to the public library as soon as it opened, using their computers to search for jobs and study for her GED. The librarians had grown to know her, sometimes sneaking her an extra bottle of water or a granola bar when no one was looking. Their small acts of kindness kept her hope alive, even on the darkest days. Between job applications, she would read everything she could get her hands on: books about business, history, science, anything to keep her mind sharp. She had learned early in life that education was her only ticket to a better future. Even now, homeless and hungry, she refused to let go of that belief. The morning crowd began to fill the streets, briefcases in hand and coffee cups clutched tightly. Most walked past without a glance in her direction, their eyes fixed straight ahead or glued to their phones. Amy didn't blame them. She had become expert at making herself invisible, at shrinking into the background of the city's busy life. Still, she kept herself clean using the public gym's facilities whenever she could scrape together enough money for a day pass, and she always made sure to be respectful of the space around the bookstore. Today felt different somehow. Maybe it was the way the early morning light caught the frost on the windows, or perhaps it was the extra friendly smile from the newspaper vendor across the street. Amy pulled out her notebook, a cheap spiral-bound thing she'd found in a recycling bin, and began writing. She'd started keeping a journal of her experiences, hoping that someday she could use her story to help others who might find themselves in similar situations. The smell of fresh bread from the nearby bakery wafted through the air, making her stomach growl loudly. She checked her pocket. $2.35. Not enough for even a small loaf. She'd learned to ignore hunger, to push it to the back of her mind along with the cold and the fear and the loneliness. Instead, she focused on her plan for the day. Library at opening time, 2 job applications, 3 hours of GED study, and then maybe check out the new shelter that had opened up across town. Little did Amy know that this ordinary morning would become the beginning of an extraordinary change in her life. Sometimes hope comes in unexpected packages, and kindness appears in the most surprising places. But for now, she simply sat in her doorway, reading her book, holding onto her dreams with a quiet determination that had kept her going all these years. Every morning for the past month, David walked the same route to his coffee shop, carrying the same worn leather bag and wearing the same warm smile. At 45, he had learned to notice the little things in life. The way the morning light hit the buildings, how the seasons changed the color of the trees along Main Street, and lately, the young girl who always sat in the doorway of Reader's Corner. He wasn't sure what first caught his attention about her. Maybe it was the fact that she was always reading, even in the dim light of dawn. Or perhaps it was the way she kept her small space tidy, showing respect for a doorway that wasn't hers. While others hurried past, eyes glued to their phones, David found himself wondering about her story. Running a coffee shop for 15 years had taught David to read people well. His regulars called him the coffee shop therapist, not because he gave advice, but because he knew how to listen. And something about this girl reminded him of his own daughter, now away at college chasing her dreams. The thought of her alone on these cold streets made his heart heavy. That morning, as he unlocked his shop's door, the smell of fresh coffee beans filled the air. His first employee, Rita, was already inside, starting the morning preparations. The familiar routine of checking inventory, warming up the machines, and arranging the pastries brought comfort, but his mind kept drifting to the girl outside the bookstore. "You're distracted today," Rita noticed as she wiped down the counter. David shared his observations about the young reader, and Rita's eyes softened. "I've seen her too," she said. "She uses the bathroom at the gas station to clean up. Always polite, never causes any trouble." As David prepared the day's first batch of coffee, he watched the morning crowd through the window. Business people in suits, construction workers in their yellow vests, teachers heading to the nearby school, all part of the daily parade of faces he'd grown to know. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the conversation he'd had with his wife Linda last night about their empty nest, or maybe it was just time for a change. The morning rush came and went like a tide, leaving behind the usual scatter of coffee cups and crumbs. During a quiet moment, David found himself making an extra hot chocolate, the good kind, with real melted chocolate and a touch of cinnamon. He added a freshly baked croissant to a paper bag, still warm from the oven. Rita raised an eyebrow as he headed toward the door. "Sometimes a small gesture can change someone's whole day," he said, more to himself than to her. The walk to the bookstore felt longer than usual, his heart beating a little faster with each step. As he approached, he saw her absorbed in her book, oblivious to the world around her. The morning light caught the frost in her hair, making it sparkle like tiny diamonds. She looked up as his shadow fell across her page, her expression guarded but not unfriendly. "I've noticed you like to read," he said, holding out the hot chocolate and croissant. "Thought you might enjoy something warm this morning." Her surprise was evident, but there was something else in her eyes, a flicker of hope, perhaps, or recognition of genuine kindness. She accepted his offering with thanks, her hands trembling slightly as they wrapped around the warm cup. "I'm David," he said simply. "I own the coffee shop down the street." He didn't ask for her story or make any demands. Sometimes, he knew, the kindest thing you can do is just let people know they're not invisible. As he walked back to his shop, he felt something had shifted in the universe. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest actions, like a pebble dropped in a still pond. Little did he know that this simple act of kindness would set in motion events that would change not only his life, but the lives of countless others in ways he couldn't imagine. The morning air was especially crisp as David walked toward Reader's Corner, carrying 2 cups this time, a hot chocolate and a coffee for himself. It had been a week since his first gesture, and these morning visits had become a quiet routine. Today felt different, though. The sky was clearing after days of rain, and something in the air spoke of change. Amy looked up from her book as he approached, a small smile breaking through her usually guarded expression. She had grown to recognize his footsteps, the gentle way he always announced his presence with a quiet clearing of his throat. The hot chocolate was always made the same way, rich and sweet, with that hint of cinnamon that made it special. "Thought we might share breakfast today," David said, settling down on the clean piece of cardboard she kept beside her spot. It was a bold move, but something told him it was time. He pulled out 2 paper bags from his coffee shop, each containing a warm croissant. The smell of fresh butter and baked dough filled the air between them. At first, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the city wake up around them. A street cleaner hummed by, morning joggers dodged delivery trucks, and the newspaper vendor across the street called out headlines to passing customers. It was Amy who finally broke the silence. "I've been reading about small business management," she said, showing him the library book in her lap. "The library lets me use their computers to study for my GED too." Her voice was soft but clear, like someone used to speaking carefully, weighing each word. David listened as she gradually shared more about her dreams of getting an education, her determination to find work despite the obstacles. She didn't mention her past, and he didn't ask. Instead, they talked about books they'd read, about the characters they loved and the stories that stayed with them. "You know," David said, warming his hands around his coffee cup, "my shop gets pretty busy around lunch. Could always use an extra pair of hands." He said it casually, like it had just occurred to him, though the idea had been forming in his mind for days. Amy's eyes widened slightly, but uncertainty crossed her face. "I don't have any proper clothes for work," she admitted, tugging at her worn jacket. "And I've never made coffee beyond instant." David smiled. "Everyone starts somewhere. Rita, my morning manager, she didn't know a latte from a cappuccino when she first started. Now she can make coffee art that looks like Van Gogh paintings." Their conversation flowed easier now, moving from coffee to customers, from books to business. David shared stories about his own struggles when he first opened the shop, about the days when he wondered if he made a huge mistake. Amy listened intently, asking questions that showed she understood more than most about the challenges of starting from nothing. As the morning grew older, the bookstore owner arrived to open up. He nodded at them both. He'd grown used to seeing them there, this odd pair sharing breakfast in his doorway. David stood up, brushing off his pants. "Think about the job," he said. "No pressure. We're open every day, same hours. And there's always hot chocolate." Amy watched him walk away, clutching the empty cup that had held more than just hot chocolate. It had held kindness, respect, and maybe something even more valuable: opportunity. She looked down at her library book about business management, then at the coffee shop down the street. For the first time in months, she felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. The rest of that morning felt different. As she walked to the library, her steps were lighter, her mind racing with possibilities. Sometimes the biggest changes in life don't announce themselves with fanfare. They slip in quietly, disguised as ordinary moments, carried on the steam of a hot chocolate and wrapped in the warmth of a simple conversation. That evening, David sat at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, trying to find the right words to explain his idea to Linda. His wife of 25 years sat across from him, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she graded papers from her high school English class. The house felt especially quiet now that both their children were away at college. "Remember how empty this place felt when Tom left for university?" He started, watching Linda's expression soften at the mention of their son. "And now, with Rachel gone too, we've got this whole house to ourselves." Linda put down her red pen and looked at her husband. She knew that tone. It was the same one he'd used when he first suggested opening the coffee shop, when he wanted to adopt their old dog Max from the shelter, when he had any idea that came straight from his heart. "I've been talking to that young girl I mentioned, the one who reads outside the bookstore," David continued, his voice gentle but determined. "She's not just someone down on her luck. She's smart, really smart. Been studying for her GED at the library, reading business books. She reminds me so much of Rachel." The kitchen clock ticked steadily as David shared everything he'd learned about Amy over their morning conversations. He told Linda about Amy's determination to learn, her quiet dignity, how she kept her small space neat despite having nothing. As he spoke, he could see his wife's expression changing, her teacher's heart recognizing a student who needed a chance. "The spare room is just sitting there," David said finally, letting the suggestion hang in the air. "We could help her get back on her feet, give her a real shot at finishing her education." Linda took off her glasses, a habit she had when she was thinking deeply. It's not a small thing you're suggesting, she said carefully. Taking someone into our home, there would need to be boundaries, expectations. David nodded eagerly. Of course. She'd need to commit to her education, maybe help out at the coffee shop. We could teach her real business skills. He paused, remembering Amy's careful questions about coffee shop management. I think she has potential, Linda. She just needs someone to believe in her. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful, filled with possibility. Linda stood up and walked to the window, looking out at their quiet suburban street. The spare room had been Rachel's, and before that, Tom's. Its emptiness had been a constant reminder of their children growing up and moving on. You know, Linda said slowly, turning back to face her husband, I've been thinking lately about how blessed we've been. Our kids had every opportunity we could give them. Maybe it's time to extend that blessing to someone else. David felt his heart lift. He knew that tone too. It was the one Linda used when she'd made up her mind about something important. We'd need to do it right, she continued, her teacher's organizational skills kicking in. Clear guidelines, expectations about education and work, maybe a timeline for goals. They spent the next few hours talking through the details, making lists, considering every angle. It wasn't just about offering a room. It was about offering a chance at a different life, a support system, a family. By the time they went to bed, the basic framework of their plan was sketched out on one of Linda's yellow legal pads. As David lay in bed that night, he thought about how life's biggest decisions often feel like the easiest ones to make. Tomorrow, he would approach Amy with their offer. Not charity, but an opportunity. One that would require commitment and hard work on her part. Somehow, he knew she would understand that. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, and David thought about Amy in her doorway. Tomorrow would be the last night she'd have to sleep there, if she accepted their offer. Sometimes, he reflected, the best decisions are the ones that seem crazy to everyone else, but feel absolutely right in your heart. The spare room felt like a museum of memories. Linda had spent the morning making the bed with fresh sheets, dusting the empty shelves, and opening windows to let in the crisp autumn air. A small desk sat in the corner, cleared of Rachel's old college applications and decorated with a simple desk lamp and a new notebook. Amy stood in the doorway, clutching her backpack to her chest. Her eyes moved slowly around the room, taking in every detail as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. The walls were a soft blue, and sunlight streamed through lace curtains, creating patterns on the hardwood floor. It's not much, Linda said gently, but it's yours for as long as you need it. She watched as Amy took a tentative step into the room, then another. The girl moved like someone in a dream, afraid that any sudden movement might wake her up. The first few days were a delicate dance of adjustment. Amy was like a shadow in the house, quiet and careful. She made her bed with military precision each morning, kept her few belongings meticulously organized, and seemed afraid to take up too much space. At meals, she would wait until everyone else had served themselves before taking the smallest portion possible. Linda noticed how Amy would flinch slightly when doors closed too loudly, how she would scan each room for exits, how she kept her backpack packed and ready by her bed. These were the habits of someone who had learned to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. Each observation made Linda's heart ache, but she knew that trust would take time. David brought Amy to the coffee shop for her first day of training. Rita, the morning manager, took her under her wing, teaching her the basics of coffee making. Amy absorbed everything like a sponge, taking notes in her small notebook, practicing until she could steam milk to the perfect temperature and texture. She's a natural, Rita told David after the first week. Never seen anyone pick up latte art so quickly. Indeed, Amy's carefully crafted hearts and leaves were already drawing compliments from regular customers. But more than that, she was learning to smile more, to make eye contact, to exist in the world without trying to disappear. At home, small changes began to appear. One evening, Linda came home to find Amy in the kitchen, attempting to recreate her favorite soup from memory. The counter was a mess of chopped vegetables and spices, and Amy looked mortified at being caught. But Linda just rolled up her sleeves and asked to help, and soon the kitchen was filled with the smell of cooking and the sound of shared laughter. David found ways to include Amy in the business side of the coffee shop. He taught her about inventory management, showed her how to place orders with suppliers, explained the basics of bookkeeping. She soaked up the knowledge eagerly, often staying late to help with the daily accounts. The nightmares were the hardest part. Sometimes, in the dark hours of the morning, Amy's cries would echo through the house. Linda would sit outside her door, speaking softly until the sounds subsided, respecting Amy's need for space while letting her know she wasn't alone. Slowly, piece by piece, Amy began to unpack her life, both literally and figuratively. Her books migrated from her backpack to the empty shelves. A small potted plant appeared on the windowsill, then a photo of a sunset she'd taken with a second-hand phone David had helped her get. Each item was a tiny act of faith, a small step toward believing in permanence. 1 month after moving in, Amy passed her GED practice test with flying colors. That evening, as they celebrated with ice cream around the kitchen table, she looked around at these people who had become more than just helpers. They were becoming family. For the first time in years, she felt something settling in her heart, the feeling of being home. 6 months could change everything. The coffee shop buzzed with the usual morning crowd, but something was different now. Behind the counter, Amy moved with confidence, her hands dancing between cups and machines as she crafted perfect lattes. Regular customers now asked for her by name, drawn not just by her coffee art, but by her quiet warmth and genuine smile. The shop's records sat open on the back office desk, neat rows of numbers in Amy's careful handwriting. She discovered a talent for business that surprised everyone except David. Under his guidance, she'd reorganized the inventory system, cutting waste by 15%. The savings helped fund a new espresso machine, which she'd researched and selected herself. You should have seen her negotiating with a supplier, David told Linda one evening, his voice full of pride. Got us a better deal than I've managed in 15 years. The coffee shop's profits had grown steadily since Amy started implementing her ideas, each success building her confidence bit by bit. But it wasn't just business skills that were blooming. Linda watched as Amy's GED scores improved week after week. Their kitchen table had become a study spot in the evenings, with textbooks spread out between dinner plates. Amy approached each subject with determination, asking questions that showed she wasn't just memorizing facts, she was truly understanding them. The change was visible in smaller ways too. Her posture had straightened, no longer trying to make herself invisible. The careful way she used to monitor every exit had softened into a more natural awareness of her surroundings. Her clothes, now chosen from proper shops instead of donation bins, reflected a growing sense of self-worth. One morning, a local reporter stopped by the coffee shop for her usual drink. She noticed Amy's intricate coffee art and struck up a conversation. As Amy talked about her journey from homelessness to business management, the reporter's eyes lit up. This is a story people need to hear, she said, pulling out her notebook. The article appeared in the local paper a week later. From Doorway to Downtown Success, a story of second chances, read the headline. The piece captured Amy's journey without sensationalism, focusing on her hard work and the power of community support. David kept a copy pinned to the shop's bulletin board, right next to the month's record-breaking sales figures. Regular customers began sharing the article online, and soon the coffee shop had new visitors, people touched by Amy's story, wanting to see for themselves. Some were other business owners, curious about the young woman who had helped transform a small coffee shop. Others were people facing their own struggles, drawn by the hope in Amy's story. But the most significant growth wasn't in the business numbers or the social media shares. It was in the quiet moments. Amy teaching a new barista the perfect milk steaming technique, her patient explanation echoing how David had taught her. It was in her confident handling of the morning rush, calling out orders, and remembering regular customers' preferences. It was in the way she now joined family discussions at dinner, offering opinions and ideas without fear of judgment. Linda noticed how Amy had started helping other homeless youth who sometimes came to the shop. She'd give them hot drinks on cold days, share information about library resources, sometimes even help them fill out job applications. Her own experience had given her an understanding that no training manual could teach. One evening, as David was closing up the shop, he found Amy still at the desk, surrounded by community college brochures. She looked up as he entered, her eyes bright with purpose. "I think I want to study business management," she said. "Properly, I mean. There's so much more I could learn." David smiled, remembering the quiet girl who used to read business books in a bookstore doorway. 6 months had indeed changed everything, but he knew this was just the beginning. Amy wasn't just surviving anymore. She was planning for a future she could now believe in. And that, he realized, was the biggest growth of all. The local newspaper article was just the beginning. One morning, as Amy was crafting her signature leaf design on a latte, a woman in a crisp business suit approached the counter. She introduced herself as a producer from the local news station. "Your story touched so many people," she said, sliding her card across the counter. "Would you be interested in sharing it with a wider audience?" David watched from the back office as Amy considered the offer. She'd grown more confident over the months, but publicity was different from making coffee or managing inventory. Still, he saw that familiar determination in her eyes, the same look she'd had when tackling difficult math problems or learning new business skills. The TV segment aired during the evening news. Amy sat in the coffee shop's warm lighting, speaking honestly about her journey. She didn't sugarcoat the difficulties of homelessness or the challenges of starting over, but she emphasized the power of opportunity and community support. The camera panned to show her teaching a new employee, then to the neat rows of figures in her account books. "It wasn't just about having a place to sleep," she said in the interview, her voice clear and steady. "It was about having people who believed in me enough to invest in my future. Everyone deserves that chance." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The coffee shop's phone started ringing the next morning. Other business owners wanted to know how they could start similar programs. City council members called to discuss youth employment initiatives. Social workers reached out about connecting their clients with job training opportunities. But the most meaningful responses came from unexpected places. A local tech company's CEO showed up one morning, ordered a coffee, and ended up staying for an hour. By the time she left, she'd committed to creating 5 paid internships specifically for homeless youth. A real estate developer pledged to set aside 3 apartments in his new building for a youth housing program. The city council called a special meeting to discuss the issue. Amy found herself standing at a podium, sharing her experience with community leaders. She spoke about the importance of combining housing with education and job training, her voice gaining strength as she outlined practical solutions drawn from her own journey. "It's not just about giving people things," she explained. "It's about giving them tools to rebuild their lives. A safe place to sleep is essential, but so is the opportunity to learn, to work, to contribute." The ripple effect continued to spread. Other coffee shops in the city began offering barista training programs for homeless youth. The library system, inspired by Amy's story of studying for her GED, extended their hours and created dedicated quiet study spaces. A local community college established a scholarship program for students transitioning out of homelessness. David and Linda's phone kept ringing too. Other families wanted to know how they could help, what it meant to open their homes, what challenges to expect. Linda started keeping a notebook of resources and advice, which grew into an informal guide for families wanting to make a difference. The coffee shop became a symbol of possibility. People would come in just to leave notes of encouragement or share their own stories of overcoming hardship. Amy kept these messages in a special box, reading them on difficult days when she needed reminding of how far she'd come. One afternoon, a teenage girl came in, clutching a worn backpack much like Amy used to carry. She ordered the cheapest drink on the menu and sat reading a borrowed library book. Amy recognized the look in her eyes. She'd seen it in her own reflection not so long ago. Without a word, she prepared a hot chocolate with her special cinnamon touch and carried it to the girl's table. As she shared her story with this stranger who reminded her so much of herself, Amy realized something powerful. Change rarely happens in grand gestures. It happens in small moments, in hot chocolates and kind words, in opportunities given and received. The ripple effect wasn't just about policy changes or news stories. It was about showing people that a different future was possible, one cup of coffee at a time. The idea came to Amy one rainy Tuesday evening as she sat at the kitchen table with David and Linda, surrounded by newspaper clippings and emails from people wanting to help. "What if we could make this bigger?" she asked, pushing aside her college application papers. "What if we could help more people, create something lasting?" David looked up from his coffee, seeing that familiar spark in Amy's eyes. The same spark that had led to reorganizing the coffee shop's inventory system and implementing new training programs. Linda set down her reading glasses, already reaching for her notepad. She'd learned that when Amy had an idea, it was worth writing down. "We could call it Bridge of Hope," Amy continued, her words tumbling out faster now. "A foundation that connects homeless youth with businesses willing to train them, families willing to support them, and schools willing to teach them." Her hands moved as she spoke, sketching invisible bridges in the air. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Linda's teaching background proved invaluable as they developed educational support programs. David's business connections helped secure initial funding and partnerships. Amy's first-hand experience shaped every aspect of their planning, ensuring the foundation would address real needs with practical solutions. They started small, converting the coffee shop's storage room into a tiny office. Amy spent her evenings there after her college classes, answering emails and coordinating with local businesses. Her own story became a powerful tool. When she spoke at community meetings or met with potential partners, people listened because she spoke from experience. The foundation's first success story was a young man named Pete, who had been sleeping in his car while taking computer coding classes at the library. Through Bridge of Hope, he found housing with a retired teacher, got an internship at a local tech startup, and eventually landed a full-time job as a junior developer. Word spread quickly. Other businesses reached out, wanting to create similar programs. A local hotel chain developed a hospitality training program. An auto repair shop started offering apprenticeships. Each success story led to more opportunities, more doors opening, more bridges being built. Amy insisted on keeping the foundation's approach personal. "We're not just matching people with programs," she would explain during training sessions. "We're creating connections, building trust, showing people they have value." Every youth who came through their doors got individual attention, a tailored plan, and ongoing support. The coffee shop remained the heart of it all. Regular customers became volunteers, offering their skills as mentors. The bulletin board that once held Amy's newspaper article now displayed dozens of success stories. Photos of smiling graduates, job offers, college acceptance letters. Each one represented a life changed, a future reclaimed. Linda noticed how Amy would light up when speaking to the young people who came seeking help. She shared her own struggles openly, showing them that their current situation wasn't their final destination. "The hardest part," she would tell them, "is believing you deserve better. Once you believe that, everything else becomes possible." The foundation's work caught the attention of city officials. They were invited to help shape new policies on youth homelessness, bringing their practical experience to the planning table. Amy's suggestion of combining housing support with education and job training became a model for other cities to follow. 1 year after starting Bridge of Hope, they celebrated their 20th success story. The coffee shop closed early for a special gathering. Young people who had found their feet, families who had opened their homes, business owners who had taken chances on inexperienced workers. Looking around the room, Amy could hardly believe how far things had come. As she stood to address the crowd, Amy caught David and Linda's eyes. They beamed with pride, not just as mentors or supporters, but as family. Bridge of Hope isn't just about helping people cross from homelessness to stability, she said, her voice steady and sure. It's about showing them they don't have to make that journey alone. The foundation had become more than just an organization. It was a testament to the power of second chances, a proof that sometimes all people need is an opportunity and someone who believes in them. And in helping others find their way, Amy had found something too. Her purpose, her calling, her way of turning her past struggles into hope for others. 2 years had passed since that first morning when David offered a cup of hot chocolate to a girl reading in a doorway. The coffee shop had grown, now with 3 locations across the city, each one partnering with Bridge of Hope to provide training and employment opportunities. Amy stood behind the counter of the original shop, training a new group of students, her movements confident and precise as she demonstrated the art of the perfect espresso pull. The key is patience, she explained, watching as a young trainee practiced steaming milk. Everything worth doing takes time. She caught her reflection in the polished coffee machine, a far cry from the girl she'd been 2 years ago. Now she wore a manager's apron. Her business degree courses were nearly complete, and her ideas had helped change hundreds of lives. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the framed photos on the wall. They called it the Wall of Hope, dozens of pictures showing success stories from the foundation. Each photo told a story. A former homeless teen now running her own catering business. A young man who'd gone from sleeping in parks to studying engineering. A woman who now managed a shelter after getting back on her feet. David watched from his office as Amy handled the morning rush. The shop was buzzing with its usual mix of regulars and new faces. Some customers were former Bridge of Hope participants, stopping by to share updates about their lives or mentor current students. Others were business owners, inspired to start their own training programs after seeing the foundation's success. The back room that once stored coffee beans had evolved into a proper classroom. Linda had retired from teaching to run the foundation's education program full-time. Every afternoon, the space filled with students working on their GED studies or college applications. The sound of their discussions and laughter would mix with the whir of coffee grinders and the hiss of steam wands. "Remember when this was just a storage room?" Amy asked during a quiet moment, joining David in his office. She picked up a framed copy of the original newspaper article that had started it all. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed." The numbers told part of the story. 20 successful businesses participating in the training program, 50 young people housed with support families, hundreds of lives touched in ways big and small. But the real impact couldn't be measured in statistics. It was in the confidence of a formerly homeless teen serving customers with a smile, in the pride of someone receiving their first paycheck, in the hope lighting up eyes that had once known only despair. As they talked, a new group of trainees arrived for their first day of work. Amy watched them file in, remembering her own nervous excitement when she'd started. "The best part," she told David, "is seeing them realize they're capable of more than they ever imagined." The foundation's model had spread to other cities, each adapting it to their local needs while keeping the core principle, combining housing, education, and job training with genuine human connection. Amy regularly spoke at conferences now, sharing the lessons they'd learned. "It's not about charity," she would say. "It's about opportunity and dignity." That evening, after the last customer had left and the machines were cleaned, Amy took a walk past Reader's Corner bookstore. The doorway where she'd once slept was different now. The store had partnered with Bridge of Hope to create a small library section dedicated to business and education resources, free for anyone to use. Back at home, David and Linda's house was full of life. Two new young people had moved into what had once been Amy's room, while she had her own apartment above the coffee shop. But she still came for family dinner every Sunday. These people who had become more than mentors. They were her family in every way that mattered. As she helped Linda clear the dishes that evening, Amy thought about legacy. It wasn't just about the foundation or the success stories or the changed lives. It was about proving that one act of kindness, one cup of hot chocolate offered on a cold morning, could create ripples that touched countless lives. The true legacy was the chain of hope that continued to grow, one person helping another, each success becoming inspiration for someone else's journey. The story hadn't ended. It was still being written, in every cup of coffee served, in every life touched, in every bridge built between despair and hope. And somewhere in the city, someone else was taking their first step across that bridge, not knowing yet where it might lead, but daring to believe in a better tomorrow.